Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Florian. I'm the General Counsel, Africa, Middle East, and newly appointed Head of Legal and Compliance Operations for Siemens Energy. And also, I'm chairing Siemens Energy's Disability and Allies Network, as we call it. Been working on disability inclusion topics for a little over 2 years now, and it's great to be with all of you and talk a little bit about our experience with the ILO GBDN self-assessment. So maybe to start with, why did we decide to work and how did we decide to work with the ILO GBDN self-assessment? For reasons of time, I'll refer to it as self-assessment going forward. So we were for a longer while looking for a meaningful KPI to drive disability inclusion, because even though a measurement may not be entirely accurate, there is a certain truth to the fact that if you don't measure things, they don't get done. So we were looking for a tool that basically drives us. We needed a yardstick to drive disability inclusion. And then we looked around at what was available in the market, and it's a bit difficult to find something meaningful and also with a certain depth. And we believe we found that in the self-assessment, and the way how we plan to do it is we try to get a score, and then we want to get that score up over time. So very simple. How did we start? Against Susan's explicit instruction, and which is also recorded in the self-assessment, the self-assessment was first taken on a global level, so by board members and by the global head of HR and so on, which on one hand is great because it shows that there is a willingness of top management to engage with the topic. But when we looked at the results, we soon figured out that it doesn't give us enough detail, and it doesn't give us enough local flavor to actually be able to action the findings. So we said, okay, we need to do some more, and we need to regionalize and be regionally more specific in taking the self-assessment. So we set up a project group, or actually we had a project manager, Dominic Hartel, who did an awesome job in driving this. And we then needed to decide on certain regions or countries, and ultimately, for reasons of practicality, because we believe we had enough people on the ground to facilitate the self-assessment, we decided to go for Brazil, the US, UK, Germany, and the Middle East. And then we started getting people together, convincing managers of all sorts, so business managers, but also support function managers like EHS, HR, what else? IT, real estate, right? We all brought them to the table. It was a big struggle to find a common time and space, but we managed over summer. And then we took the self-assessment in one go, and the immediate effect was that it triggered some very meaningful discussions amongst these executives, and it also triggered the realization that they all have a role to play in disability inclusion, which in itself is a finding that made the effort a worthwhile effort. We focused really on regional top-level management. So we had like basically the first line, so the heads of the functions or the deputies involved, which is also very helpful because you put the accountability on shoulders of those who actually can action stuff and who are now in a position, and we will have to take it up with them when we really action the findings. Findings overall in the regions were quite interesting, very diverse. We have a very strong result for the US, which may have to do with two facts, right? One may be cultural, if I'm maybe a little bit provocative here, right? It may have to do with the fact that they just believe that they're doing everything great. But to be fair, the US were also the first country, at least in Siemens Energy's landscape, where a high-level leader put disability inclusion on the agenda. They were the first ones to have an IND council. So they have a long history and they came along a long way. So I think they scored at an advanced level, whereas in all other countries we scored consistently, also with the global assessment that we have taken on a average, I think on that 40%. I can't remember how it's exactly labeled, on a base level. So there is clearly room for improvement. Struggles. We as a project company, which doesn't really have B2C business, obviously struggled a bit with the section customers, which is very much directed at businesses who are open to the public, who have branches, and we don't have that. So one action item that we want to take up with Susan and the ILO GBDN is to maybe revise that section and make sure that it also is possible to address B2B with all sections. That being said, there were some meaningful insights also in taking these questions, and we will also take it to heart and action it. What sticks to mind in terms of findings? There were in the answers there were a lot of references, a la we're doing this because we have to do it because we're obliged to do it by the law. Which then leads, which is good, right? But it simply leads to the fact that we're compliant, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're inclusive. And one of my agenda items for the upcoming year is certainly to raise that question. Is that what we want to be? Do we want to be a compliant company? Sorry. Or do we want to be inclusive and maybe over compliant and maybe do something on a global level that is bigger than and better than what the law obliges us to do. What also sticks in mind is that we still have a lot of cleanup to do in our policies. So I remember that that question: if we have an EHS policy that explicitly mentions persons with disabilities, simply because the consequences of an EHS incident are statistically proven that they're bigger for people with disabilities than for others. So this is one point, but there were others where we need to do some cleanup in our policies. So what's next? We have produced sort of working cards where we look at each question, with the exception of the questions that are really fine in all countries and on a global level as well. And then we try to derive from these findings certain action items and allocate them to individuals who are then under an obligation to drive the change. This is ongoing. It's quite a massive effort, and we certainly have to prioritize because we have probably, I don't know, 30 of these cards, so we can't action them all at the same time. But we have to prioritize, and then we go step by step. And then we will measure ourselves again. The question being is, initially we had planned to do this every year. Considering the time that it took to take the assessment and the time that it will take to implement certain measures, I have a tendency to be a bit more conservative on that end and probably only measure every 2 years, because only then we will see some meaningful change. I'm afraid that if we measure again next year, we will just have the same findings as this year and create the wrong impression that we're not doing anything.
30 seconds.
Overall, very good experience. I can really only encourage everyone to do it like we did or differently, but do it.